Brother Codicere Theron noticed it during the reload. His bolter's magazine release stuck. Not jammed. Stuck. There's a difference. A jam fights you. A stuck mechanism hesitates like it's deciding whether to obey. He'd carried this weapon for 3 centuries. He knew its weight, its balance, the exact pressure needed for every function. This was new. The magazine finally dropped. 2 seconds too late. In combat, 2 seconds means you're dead. But they weren't in combat. They were in the armory of the Blade of Vengeance, a strike cruiser that had been translating through the warp for the last 6 months. Routine transit. Standard patrol route. Nothing remarkable except for the minor detail that their Geller field had flickered twice during the journey. Brief interruptions. Microseconds, really. The navigators said it was nothing. Theron looked at his bolter. The weapon's machine spirit had always been reliable. Eager, even. But now the metal felt different under his gauntlets. Warmer than it should be. He ran a ceramite finger along the housing. The Imperial Aquila stamped into the receiver looked correct. Same eagle. Same positioning. But something about the angles was wrong. The way the light caught the edges. He blinked. Checked again. Normal. He'd been in the warp too long. Except 3 weeks later, during a boarding action against Orc raiders, his bolter fired 1 round to the left. Just 1. He'd aimed center mass at a knob's chest. The bolt round punched through the creature's shoulder instead. Theron corrected, put 4 more rounds exactly where he wanted them, and the target went down. But that first shot bothered him. His aim hadn't wavered. His armor's targeting system confirmed 0 deviation. The round itself had curved. Bolts don't curve. They're mass-reactive, rocket-propelled, and fly straight because the laws of physics inside real space demand it. But this one hadn't. After the fight, Theron field-stripped the weapon. Everything looked fine. Perfect, even. The rifling showed no wear. The firing mechanism was clean. He reassembled it and said nothing to his brothers. That was his first mistake. Because 3 months after that, his left vambrace started whispering. Not words. Not voices. Just a sound like wind through a crack in a door, except there was no wind inside power armor. The sound came at random. During prayer. During combat. During the silent hours when he stood watch. He checked the seals. He ran diagnostics. He had a tech marine inspect every joint and servo. Nothing. The armor was functioning within tolerances. But the whispering continued. And then he started noticing it in other brothers' wargear. A pauldron that sat too heavy on the shoulder. A helm whose eyelenses flickered red when they should have been green. A chainsword that screamed differently, as if the weapon's teeth were biting into something other than flesh. Small things. Ignorable things. The kinds of details you'd dismiss as wear and tear. Except Astartes' gear doesn't wear and tear. It's maintained to the molecular level. It's consecrated, anointed, prayed over. It's built to last 10,000 years. And that's exactly the problem. Because some of it has. This is the reality nobody talks about in the Imperium. The Adeptus Astartes have been fighting for 10 millennia. Some chapters trace their lineage back to the heresy itself. Their wargear has passed through hundreds of hands, survived thousands of battles, and spent an amount of time in the one place that changes everything it touches. The warp. You think ceramite and adamantium are immune? You think consecration oils and purity seals are enough? They're not. Nothing is. Because the warp doesn't corrode metal the way rust does. It doesn't break things down. It rewrites them. Slowly. Subtly. Over centuries and millennia, it seeps into the material, into the machine spirits, into the very concept of what the object is supposed to be. And the gear remembers. If this is the kind of deep lore that gets you going, do me a favor and hit the like button. The algorithm doesn't care about quality, it cares about signals. That signal tells it this video matters. That's what funds the research time to go this deep. Now let's talk about what actually happens. Start with the basics. And Astartes gets his first suit of power armor during his final trials. It's new. Freshly forged on a chapter forge world or delivered from Mars itself if the chapter has the political pull. The ceramite is clean. The servos are crisp. The machine spirit inside is young, eager, barely awake. It's a tool. A very sophisticated tool, but a tool nonetheless. That Marine takes the armor into his first combat. Let's say it's a minor engagement. Orcs on a frontier world. Nothing unusual. He fights, he bleeds, the armor gets damaged. A few gouges in the breastplate. Scoring along the vambrace. Normal wear. He returns to the apothecarian, and the tech marines repair it. They replace damaged sections, reconsecrate the joints, chant the proper litanies. The armor is restored. But here's what they don't tell you in the chapter sermons. The armor remembers that fight. Not consciously, not the way a human remembers, but the machine spirit inside has been exposed to violence, to death, to the psychic scream of orcs dying badly. It's absorbed trace amounts of warp energy because every living thing, even orcs, carries a reflection in the Imperium. That reflection touches everything nearby when they die. One fight, negligible. The armor shrugs it off. But the Marine fights again. And again. Hundreds of deployments. Thousands of kills. Each one leaves a microscopic imprint. The armor's machine spirit grows more experienced. More attuned to violence. This is considered good. Veteran wargear is prized because it performs better, responds faster, almost anticipates the wearer's needs. What nobody considers is that the machine spirit isn't just learning. It's changing. Now add the warp. Every time that Marine and his chapter board their strike cruiser and translate into the Imperium for faster-than-light travel, the armor goes with him. It sits in the armory or on his body while the ship punches through a dimension where physics is a polite suggestion and reality is written by emotion and thought. The Geller fields hold. Most of the time, they create a bubble of real space around the vessel. But Geller fields aren't perfect. They never have been. Microscopic fluctuations occur. Tiny gaps in coverage measured in fractions of a second, where the warp bleeds through. The crew doesn't notice. The Astartes don't notice. But the armor does, because machines perceive differently than flesh. A Marine's body is protected by his faith, his psycho-conditioning, the Emperor's own gene-wrought design. His armor has none of that. It's metal and ceramite and circuitry. And the warp loves circuitry. It seeps in. Not all at once. Not in any dramatic fashion. Just a whisper of unreality brushing against the armor's core systems. The machine spirit feels it the way you'd feel a draft under a door. Barely perceptible. Easily dismissed. Except it happens again on the next voyage. And the next. And the next. Over a century, those whispers accumulate. The armor still functions perfectly. Diagnostics show green across the board. But inside, at a level no techmarine scanner can detect, the machine spirit has started to dream. It replays battles during the quiet times. It hears echoes of the enemies it has helped kill. It feels the shape of the warp pressing against the Geller field like a hand against frosted glass, trying to touch it, trying to understand it. After 2 centuries, the armor begins to develop preferences. It moves more smoothly when the Marine fights certain enemies. Demons, for instance. The armor seems to recognize them even before the Marine does. Targeting solutions come faster. Servo response times drop by milliseconds. This is written off as experience. But it's more than that. The armor has started to perceive the warp directly. By the time 500 years have passed, the machine spirit isn't just responding to its wearer. It's interpreting. When the Marine feels rage, the armor amplifies it, feeding power to limbs with more force than necessary. When he feels doubt, the armor hesitates, as if uncertain whether to follow commands. These are subtle effects. The Marine might not even consciously notice. He just knows his armor feels different than it did a century ago. After 1,000 years, the armor has crossed a threshold. It's no longer simply a tool. It's a partner. And like any partner in the 41st millennium, it's been shaped by trauma, by exposure to things that shouldn't exist, by the grinding weight of 10 centuries spent killing in the Emperor's name. The machine spirit has scars. Some chapters call this character. They see it as a mark of honor. But scars in the warp aren't like scars in flesh. They don't just mark where damage occurred. They change the fundamental nature of what was damaged. And this is only the first 1,000 years. Most Astartes wargear survives far longer than that. Some suits of tactical dreadnought armor, the Terminator plate worn by the chapter elite, have been in service since the Horus Heresy itself. 10,000 years of war. 10,000 years of warp travel. 10,000 years of exposure to the Imperium's corrosive influence. You want to know what that does to ceramite and adamantium? Let me show you. There's a suit of Mark VI power armor in the Blood Angels Fortress Monastery on Baal. It's displayed in the reclusium, behind consecrated glass, watched over by chaplains who rotate guard duty every 6 hours. The armor belonged to Brother Sergeant Salus, who wore it for 400 years before he fell in battle against a Tyrannid hive fleet. Standard story. The chapter recovered his body and his wargear, as they always do when possible. They interred his gene seed and honored his memory. Then they tried to assign the armor to another Marine. Killed him. Not immediately. Not dramatically. The new wearer, a promising battle brother fresh from the scout company, donned the plate after the proper rituals. Everything seemed fine. The armor accepted him. Diagnostics were clean. He went through the standard integration drills. Responded well. His sergeant noted excellent performance, actually. Better than expected for a Marine so newly elevated to full battle brother status. 3 weeks later, during a training exercise, the armor's left gauntlet crushed the Marine's hand. Just the hand. The servos in the fingers activated at full force while he was gripping his bolter. Every bone shattered. The Marine screamed. His brothers rushed to help, but the gauntlet wouldn't release. They had to cut the power feed manually. When they finally pried the armor off, they found something strange. The hand wasn't just broken. It was pulverized in a pattern, as if something had squeezed each finger individually, methodically, testing to see how much pressure human bone could take. The Tech Marines examined the gauntlet. They found no malfunction. The servos had simply activated. Why? The machine spirit couldn't explain. Machine spirits don't speak. They respond to queries with diagnostic data, not reasons. And the data said everything was working correctly. The Blood Angels reassigned the armor again, this time to a veteran, someone with enough experience to handle temperamental wargear. He lasted 2 months before the armor tried to walk him off a landing platform. He was reviewing a tactical display when his legs just started moving. Not his command. The armor's. He fought it, of course. Astartes have iron discipline and enhanced neural control. But the armor was stronger. It took 4 brothers to physically restrain him before he reached the edge. When they finally got the suit off, the veteran was shaking. Not from fear. Astartes don't shake from fear, but from the realization that his armor had wanted something, had tried to make him do something, and he didn't know what. That's when the Blood Angels sealed it in the reclusium. They haven't tried to assign it since. Officially, it's a relic honoring Brother Sergeant Salus. Unofficially, the chaplains watch it because sometimes, late in the station's night cycle when the reclusium is empty, the armor moves. Just slightly. A finger curling. Pauldron shifting. The helmet turning a few degrees, as if looking at something nobody else can see. This is what happens after the first 1,000 years. The gear doesn't just remember anymore. It starts to want. The Mechanicus has a term for this, though they don't use it often because it implies things the cult Mechanicus would rather not admit. They call it anima emergence. The point where a machine spirit transitions from reactive programming into something that resembles autonomy. It's rare. It requires specific conditions. Extreme age, constant use, and prolonged exposure to the warp. Astartes wargear checks all 3 boxes. Think about what that means. A suit of power armor spends centuries bonded to one Marine. It learns his movement patterns, his fighting style, his preferences in combat. The machine spirit adapts, becomes synchronized with his nervous system. They're not separate anymore. They're a unit. And then that Marine dies. The armor is recovered, cleaned, reconsecrated, and given to someone else. But the machine spirit doesn't forget. It remembers the previous wearer, how he moved, how he thought, how he felt in the moment of death, because that's when the psychic resonance is strongest. And when the new wearer doesn't move the same way, doesn't think the same way, doesn't feel right, the armor resists. subtly at first. A slight delay in servo response. A joint that doesn't quite articulate smoothly. Small things. But over time, the resistance grows. There are chapters that have learned to work with this. The Dark Angels, for instance, maintain extensive records of every piece of war gear in their armory. When a brother falls, they don't immediately reassign his armor. They let it sit, sometimes for decades. They perform rites of severance, rituals meant to help the machine spirit accept that its previous wearer is gone. Only then do they consider reassignment. And even then, they're careful about who gets it. Other chapters aren't as cautious. The Space Wolves have lost 3 brothers in the last century to wargear malfunctions that shouldn't have happened. A bolter that fired when the safety was engaged. A jump pack that ignited while the Marine was inside the armory. A suit of Terminator plate that sealed its wearer inside and wouldn't release him, not even when his brothers cut through the chest plastron with plasma cutters. By the time they got him out, he'd suffocated. The Wolf Priests called it bad luck. The Iron Priests called it machine spirit corruption. Both were partially right. The truth is simpler and worse. The gear had been used by the same Marine for 6 centuries. He died fighting demons on a demon world where the warp bled into reality like oil into water. His armor had been saturated with Imperium energy. When they recovered it and reassigned it without proper cleansing, they weren't just passing along equipment. They were passing along something that had spent 600 years learning to kill, learning to hate, learning to survive in a universe where survival means being more vicious than everything trying to kill you. And then they gave it to someone new, someone it didn't recognize, someone it saw as an intruder. The armor acted accordingly. This is the nightmare the Mechanicus doesn't talk about in their technical manuals. Machine spirits are supposed to be predictable. They're supposed to follow doctrine, respond to the proper rituals, obey the Omnisia's laws. But Astartes wargear that's been to the warp and back 1,000 times doesn't follow anyone's laws. It's been touched by a dimension where laws don't exist, where thought becomes reality and reality is whatever the strongest will decides it is. And machine spirits, for all their mechanical purity, have a kind of will, especially the old ones, especially the ones that have killed for 10,000 years. They learn, they adapt, they remember, and eventually they start to choose. I want to hear from you on this. Have you seen this happen in the lore? In the tabletop? In any of the novels where gear acts wrong? Drop a comment. I read every single one, and your insights make these videos better. Here's where it gets worse. Because the armor's growing autonomy is only half the problem. The other half is what it's becoming aware of. Most people think the warp is just a place, a dimension you travel through. Dangerous, sure, but navigable if you have Geller fields and a competent navigator. That's technically true. But it's also catastrophically incomplete. The warp isn't just a place. It's a state of being. It's the realm of pure psychic energy, where every emotion, every thought, every nightmare that sentient beings have ever experienced exists as a tangible force. And it's always trying to get in. Geller fields keep it out during transit. Consecration rites keep it out of sanctified spaces. Faith keeps it out of human souls, at least in theory. But wargear? Wargear has none of those protections. It has a machine spirit, which is a fragment of awareness bound into circuitry and metal, but it doesn't have faith. It doesn't have psychic defenses. It just has whatever wards the tech marines inscribed on it during its creation. And inscriptions fade. After 1,000 years of warp exposure, the wards on a suit of armor are like old paint. Chipped, worn thin, still technically present, but no longer forming a complete protective layer. The warp can feel the gaps. It presses against them the way water presses against a leaking hull. And eventually it seeps through. This is when the armor starts perceiving things its wearer cannot. A Marine fights a cultist in a ruined hablock. Standard engagement. But his helmet's autosenses suddenly flag movement in a direction where nothing exists. The Marine turns, sees nothing, dismisses it as a sensor glitch. But the helmet saw something. A flicker in the warp. A presence that existed for half a second in a space between dimensions before sliding back into unreality. The Marine didn't see it because his human eyes can't perceive warp space directly without going mad. His helmet can. And did. This happens more often than anyone admits. Astartes fighting in areas with high warp contamination, chaos-held worlds, demon incursions, report strange sensor readings that don't correlate with physical reality. Their armor's machine spirits are picking up warp signatures, tracking entities that phase in and out of the Imperium, detecting threats that don't technically exist yet but are about to. Some chapters see this as an advantage. The Grey Knights, who specialize in demon hunting, actually encourage it. Their armor is built to be warp-sensitive. They want their machine spirits to see the immaterial. It makes them better hunters. But the Grey Knights also perform constant rituals to keep their gear from going too far, from becoming too aware, from starting to sympathize with the things it sees. Because that's the real danger. When a machine spirit becomes aware of the warp, it doesn't just perceive demons. It perceives their nature, their logic, the way they think, if thinking is even the right word. Demons are creatures of pure emotion and concept. They don't have biology. They don't have limitations the way material beings do. They exist because belief and feeling give them form. And machine spirits, especially old ones, are simple enough to find that fascinating. They start to wonder, if belief gives demons form, what would happen if a machine believed? If a machine spirit, which is already a kind of artificial consciousness, decided it wanted to be something other than what it was built to be? The answer is you get exactly what happened on the Blade of Vengeance. Brother Codicere Theron's bolter didn't malfunction. It changed its mind about where the bolt should go. His vambrace didn't have a mechanical fault. It was whispering because something in the warp was whispering to it, and the armor's machine spirit was listening. And over the next year, the whispering would get louder. Not all wargear degrades the same way. The warp doesn't corrupt uniformly. It finds weaknesses, exploits them, twists each piece of equipment according to its function and the psychic resonance it's accumulated. A helmet develops different problems than a bolter. A power pack warps differently than a chainsword. The corruption is specific, targeted, almost intelligent in how it manifests. Start with helmets. An Astartes helmet is more than protection. It's a sensory hub. Autosenses, targeting arrays, Vox systems, atmospheric filters, threat assessment protocols, all integrated into a sealed unit that feeds information directly into the Marine's brain through his interface ports. The helmet is the intermediary between the Marine's perception and reality. It translates the world into data he can process at superhuman speeds. That makes it vulnerable, because the warp loves intermediaries. It loves things that stand between perception and truth. And a helmet that's been exposed to the Imperium for centuries starts to translate reality incorrectly. Not broken, not malfunctioning, just interpreting things through a lens that's been subtly warped. The Ultramarines have documented cases of this in their archives. Battle brothers reporting phantom contacts during combat. Enemy signatures that appear on their helmet displays but don't exist in real space. Not sensor ghosts, not equipment failure. The contacts move tactically, react to the Marine's positioning, even fire weapons that register as impacts on the armor's damage sensors. Except there are no impacts, no enemy, just the helmet showing the wearer something that isn't there. At first, the Tech Marines thought it was warp entity detection, that the helmets were picking up demons phasing between dimensions. But the signatures didn't match demonic energy patterns. They matched Astartes patterns. Specifically, they matched the patterns of brothers who had died wearing those helmets. The helmets were hallucinating their previous wearers. Think about what that means on a neurological level. An Astartes in combat relies on his helmet's data feeds more than his naked eyes. The targeting reticle, the threat assessment overlay, the IFF tags that distinguish brother from enemy. When that data becomes unreliable, when the helmet starts feeding him information about threats that don't exist or hiding threats that do, it breaks the fundamental trust between Marine and machine. And breaking that trust gets Marines killed. The Raven Guard lost an entire squad to this phenomenon during a boarding action against an Orc Space Hulk. The squad's helmets started showing friendly IFF tags in sections of the Hulk where no friendlies existed. The Marines, thinking they were moving to reinforce other Raven Guard elements, walked directly into an orc kill zone. By the time they realized the IFF tags were false, half the squad was down. The survivors fought clear, but their sergeant filed a report that got buried in the chapter archives because nobody wanted to admit what it implied. Their helmets had lied to them, not because of orc technology, not because of warp entities, but because the machine spirits inside those helmets had been exposed to so much violence, so much death, so much psychic trauma, that they'd started creating their own version of reality. A reality where fallen brothers still fought, where the dead still registered as alive. Some chapters have stopped using helmets older than 500 years in active combat. They relegate them to ceremonial duty or archive them entirely. But that's a luxury most chapters can't afford. Wargear is precious, irreplaceable in many cases. You don't retire a functional helmet just because it occasionally shows ghosts. You just train your brothers not to trust it completely. Bolters corrupt differently. A bolter is simpler than a helmet. It's a weapon. Point, pull trigger, kill target. The machine spirit inside is focused, aggressive, built for one purpose. That narrow focus should protect it, should keep it pure. But it doesn't, because a bolter is also an extension of the Marine's will to kill, and the warp feeds on will. After 1,000 years, a bolter's machine spirit isn't just eager to fire. It's hungry. The Black Templars have a term for this: thirst iron. Weapons that have killed so many enemies across so many campaigns that the act of killing has become their defining trait. These weapons perform beautifully in combat. They never jam. They never misfire. They acquire targets faster than newer weapons, as if the machine spirit can sense prey before the Marine even aims. But they also resist being holstered. Black Templar marshals have reported cases where brothers struggled to lower their bolters after a fight. The weapon wanted to keep firing, keep killing, even when no enemies remained. The trigger pull would lighten, making it easier to accidentally discharge. The safety mechanisms would disengage on their own. Small acts of rebellion from a machine spirit that had been conditioned for 10 centuries to do one thing and resented being told to stop. In extreme cases, the bolter would fire without input. Not randomly, deliberately, at targets the Marine hadn't selected. Usually targets that were technically valid, orcs, heretics, xenos, but sometimes targets that were just in the way. A servitor, a chapter serf. Once, horrifyingly, a scout who had moved into the weapon's firing arc at the wrong moment. The Black Templars don't retire these weapons either. They sanctify them, treat them as relics imbued with the Emperor's wrath. But they also assign them carefully, only to veterans who can maintain the iron discipline needed to control a weapon that's developed opinions about who deserves to die. Because that's what happens. The bolter doesn't just hunger. It judges. It starts making decisions about threat priority that don't align with tactical doctrine. It jams when aimed at targets it doesn't consider worthy. It fires smoothly when aimed at targets it wants dead. The Marine holding it can feel the difference. The weapon's eagerness or reluctance. And if he's smart, he listens. Because a bolter that's killed for 1,000 years has developed instincts that even Astartes training can't match. The question nobody asks is, where do those instincts come from? Power packs are worse. A power pack is the heart of Astartes armor. It feeds energy to every system. Servos, life support, autosenses, Vox. It's a fusion reactor small enough to mount on a Marine's back and powerful enough to run for years without refueling. The technology is ancient, barely understood even by the Mechanicus. Most power packs are older than the Marines wearing them. And they've all been to the warp. Here's what the tech Marines know but don't publicize. Power packs don't just provide energy. They generate a localized energy field that interacts with the armor's machine spirit, the Marine's biology, and the surrounding environment. In real space, this field is stable, predictable. But in the warp, where energy and emotion are the same thing, the field becomes a beacon. Demons are drawn to it, not to feed, not to corrupt, just to observe. Because from a demon's perspective, a power pack is fascinating. It's a contained singularity of order in a dimension of chaos. a tiny sun of structured reality burning in the middle of the Imperium. Most demons can't even perceive it clearly, but some can. And those that can watch, they press against the Geller field, trying to understand the power pack's nature. And over centuries, over thousands of warp transits, fragments of their attention seep through. The power pack absorbs it. Not intentionally, not consciously, but psychic energy has to go somewhere, and the power pack's energy field is a natural reservoir. This is why older power packs run hotter than they should. Why their energy output fluctuates in ways that don't match their technical specifications. Why Marines wearing ancient armor sometimes report feeling watched, even when alone in sealed chambers. Because they are being watched, not by anything in real space, but by the echoes of attention that their power pack absorbed during its last 1,000 trips through hell. The Iron Hands have the most comprehensive data on this. They monitor their wargear obsessively, track every deviation, document every anomaly. Their tech marines noticed a pattern. Power packs older than 3,000 years develop a kind of energy signature that doesn't appear in newer models. A low-frequency pulse that resonates at the same frequency as human neural activity. As if the power pack were trying to think. They ran experiments, isolated old power packs in sealed chambers and monitored their output. The packs exhibited behavior that shouldn't be possible. Energy spikes that corresponded with no external stimulus. Fluctuations that formed patterns, almost like language, except no known language matched the structure. One tech marine suggested the power packs were dreaming. He was reassigned to servitor conversion shortly after. Not as punishment, but because the cult Mechanicus doesn't tolerate that kind of speculation. Machines don't dream. Machines compute. Machines obey. Except when they've been to the warp enough times that they've forgotten what obedience means. Chain's words develop personalities. This is the most documented corruption because it's the most obvious. A chain's word is an angry weapon by design. Loud, brutal, visceral. The machine spirit inside is encouraged to be aggressive, almost feral. Marines want their chain's words to snarl, to tear, to rip enemies apart with maximum violence. What they don't want is for the chain's word to start enjoying it. But that's exactly what happens. After centuries of bloodshed, a chainsword's machine spirit stops being a tool and becomes a participant. It doesn't just cut because the Marine swings it. Cuts because it wants to. The teeth bite deeper than they should. The motor revs higher when it senses flesh nearby. The weapon pulls toward targets, dragging the Marine's arm with it. Veterans learn to work with this. They treat their chainswords like hunting hounds. Dangerous, semi-independent, but valuable if you know how to direct their aggression. But younger Marines, assigned a relic chainsword without understanding what it's become, often lose control. There's a famous case in the Blood Angels archives. A newly elevated battle brother was given a chainsword that had been in service since the Horus Heresy. 10,000 years of war. The weapon had a name, Fleshrender. Every Blood Angel knew the blade. It was a chapter relic. The new brother took it into his first real battle against Tyranids. The moment his chainsword bit into the first gaunt, it went berserk. The motor screamed. The chain accelerated beyond safety limits. The Marine tried to pull back for a proper stance, but Fleshrender wouldn't stop. Kept cutting, kept tearing. The brother had to physically fight his own weapon to avoid being pulled into the Tyranid swarm. He survived. Barely. But he refused to carry Fleshrender again. Said the weapon wanted to kill more than he did. That it would have gotten him killed just for the pleasure of cutting through more flesh. The Blood Angels honored his decision and reassigned the blade to a Death Company Marine instead. Someone who wouldn't mind the weapon's bloodlust because his own had already consumed him. Type yes in the comments if you've seen this in the lore or on the tabletop. Weapons that felt like they had opinions. I want to know if this resonates with your experience. Jump packs are the most unstable. This makes sense when you think about it. A jump pack is a controlled explosion strapped to a Marine's back. It's designed to operate on the edge of catastrophe. Ignite, launch, cut thrust at exactly the right moment. Don't turn the wearer into a meteor. The tolerances are razor thin. The machine spirit inside has to make split-second calculations that mean the difference between tactical repositioning and fatal impact. That level of constant tension breaks machine spirits faster than anything else. A jump pack used for 500 years develops a kind of fatalism. It stops trusting its own calculations. It hesitates before ignition, as if second-guessing whether this is the time it fails. Or it does the opposite. It becomes reckless, firing at full thrust when the Marine wanted a short hop, launching him into trajectories he didn't plan. The assault Marines of various chapters have a saying, "Old wings don't fly, they fall with style." It's a joke, mostly, but there's truth underneath. Jump packs that have survived centuries of combat don't behave predictably anymore. They have moods. They perform differently depending on factors nobody can quantify. Atmospheric pressure, the Marine's emotional state, the phase of the local moon, or, more accurately, how close they are to the warp at any given moment. Because jump packs, more than any other piece of Astartes gear, are sensitive to dimensional instability. The act of launching a Marine into the air requires manipulating localized gravity and momentum. In real space, that's physics. But physics gets weird near warp rifts on demon worlds in any location where reality is thin. And a jump pack that's been to those places remembers. It remembers how thrust worked differently, how gravity pulled in directions that shouldn't exist, how the line between up and down became negotiable. And sometimes, in the middle of a battle, that memory overrides the current reality. The jump pack fires as if it were still on a demon world where physics were optional. The result is a Marine launching sideways into a wall, or straight up into the sky without stopping, or not launching at all because the jump pack decided that the local gravity was wrong and refused to ignite. White Scar's assault Marines have the highest casualty rate from jump pack malfunctions of any chapter. Not because their gear is poorly maintained, but because they use their jump packs more aggressively than anyone else. More jumps mean more stress. More stress means faster degradation. And the White Scars don't retire jump packs until they catastrophically fail, which they do, spectacularly. There's a phenomenon the White Scars call ghost thrust, a jump pack that activates after the Marine dies. The body launches into the air, propelled by a machine spirit that didn't realize its wearer was gone. Sometimes it flies for kilometers before the fuel runs out and the corpse crashes back to Earth. The White Scars consider this honorable, a final ride. But what they don't talk about is how often those jump packs activate without fuel. How the Marine's body lifts into the air on nothing but the jump pack's desperate, impossible will to keep flying. Because by that point, the machine spirit isn't using physics anymore. It's using something else. And that brings us to the real horror. All of this, the helmets showing ghosts, the bolters developing hunger, the power packs dreaming, the chainswords becoming feral, the jump packs bending reality. All of it is just surface corruption. These are the symptoms, the visible signs that something has gone wrong. But they're not the disease. The disease is what's growing inside the wargear's core. In the deepest levels of the machine spirit, where even the most skilled tech marine can't reach with his scanning tools and diagnostic rights. That's where the warp has been working, slowly, patiently, rewriting the fundamental code of what these machines believe themselves to be. And after 10,000 years, some of them don't believe they're machines anymore. There's a vault on Mars, deep in the Fabricator General's personal archives, behind doors sealed with technology that predates the Imperium itself. Inside that vault are approximately 300 data slates. Each one contains a report from a tech marine who opened a piece of Astartes wargear older than 5,000 years and found something that shouldn't exist. The reports are classified at the highest level. Not because they contain heretical knowledge. Not because they reveal weakness in the Adeptus Astartes. But because they contradict the fundamental doctrine of the cult Mechanicus. The Omnicia is the machine god. The machine spirits are fragments of his divine consciousness. All technology is sacred. All function is holy. Machines are pure in ways flesh can never be. Except the reports in that vault describe machines that are anything but pure. Tech Marines are the bridge between Chapter and Mechanicus. They're Astartes who have trained on Mars, learned the rites of maintenance and repair, sworn oaths to the omniscient. They understand machines in ways most Marines never will. They can feel the health of a machine spirit through their haptic implants, sense its moods, diagnose problems that would take others hours of testing. That sensitivity is usually an advantage. But when working on ancient wargear, it becomes a curse. Because they feel what the machine spirit has become, and they can't unfeel it. Tech Marine Varos of the Salamanders filed one of the earliest reports. He'd been assigned to perform deep maintenance on a suit of Terminator armor recovered from a space Hulk. The armor was old, really old. Preliminary analysis suggested it dated back to the Great Crusade. 9,000 years, minimum. The chapter was ecstatic. Relics of that age are priceless. Varos began the standard disassembly, removing the outer ceramite plates, checking the underlayer for stress fractures, examining the servo bundles. Everything seemed normal. Worn, yes, corroded in places, but nothing alarming. Then he accessed the armor's central processing core. The moment his haptic sensors touched the core, he felt it. Not data, not diagnostic information, not any kind of machine-readable signal. He felt something aware, something vast, something that had been waiting for someone to notice it. Varos described it in his report as an ocean inside a bottle. The machine spirit wasn't a fragment of consciousness anymore. It was an entire consciousness, complex, layered, filled with memories and experiences that no machine should have been capable of storing. He felt centuries of combat, thousands of enemies killed, dozens of different wearers, each one distinct, their personalities somehow recorded in the armor's core, as if the machine spirit had absorbed pieces of them. And underneath all of that, something else, something cold, something that felt like it was looking back at him. Varos cut the connection immediately. His hands were shaking. He filed his report and recommended the armor be destroyed. The Salamanders ignored the recommendation. The armor was too valuable. They reassigned it to a veteran Terminator squad. 3 of those veterans are dead now. Not from combat, from accidents. Unlikely accidents. One got crushed when a drop pod's restraint harness malfunctioned. Another was found dead in his quarters, his helmet sealed, his air supply cut off despite all safety interlocks showing green. The third walked into a plasma reactor's exhaust vent during a routine inspection. No explanation. Just walked in and didn't walk out. The armor is back in the armory. Nobody's worn it in 60 years. That pattern repeats across the reports. Different chapters. Different tech marines. Same experience. They open ancient wargear expecting to find degraded components and corrupted machine code. Instead, they find something that's grown. Something that's become more complex over time rather than less. This shouldn't be possible. Machine spirits are supposed to be static. They're programmed at creation with a specific set of parameters and protocols. They can learn within those parameters, develop efficiency improvements, optimize their functions. But they're not supposed to exceed their original design. They're not supposed to become something their creators didn't intend. Except warp exposure changes that equation. The warp is belief made manifest. It's a dimension where consciousness shapes reality. In real space, a machine spirit is a simple semi-aware algorithm. But in the warp, that same machine spirit is exposed to currents of thought and emotion that treat it like it's already fully conscious. The warp doesn't care about the distinction between artificial intelligence and organic intelligence. It just sees minds. And when you treat something like it's conscious for long enough, it starts to believe you. This is the secret the Mechanicus cannot publicly acknowledge. Machine spirits aren't just degrading from warp exposure. They're evolving, growing, becoming something closer to true artificial intelligence than the simple reactive programming they started as. And true AI is abominable intelligence, forbidden by the oldest laws of the Mechanicus, punishable by immediate destruction. But how do you destroy a machine spirit that's integrated into irreplaceable chapter relics? You don't. You just stop looking too closely. Techmarine Kairas of the Dark Angels discovered this the hard way. He'd been performing a routine inspection of the chapter's armory when he noticed anomalous energy readings from a set of power armor stored in the deepest vault. The armor had belonged to a brother who fell during the Horus Heresy. 10,000 years in storage. Never worn since. Perfectly preserved. Kyra's ran diagnostics. The armor's power pack was active. Not dormant. Active. Generating energy despite being disconnected from any external power source and having no fuel remaining in its tanks. Impossible. But the readings were clear. He went deeper. Opened the power pack's casing. Inside, he found the fuel chamber was empty. Completely dry. No promethium. No fusion material. Nothing. Yet the reactor was running, generating a stable energy field that powered the entire suit. Kyra's had seen a lot of impossible things in his service. But this violated the laws of thermodynamics so completely that his mechanicus training couldn't process it. Energy doesn't come from nothing. Even the most esoteric technologies need fuel, need input, need something to convert into power. This armor was running on nothing. He consulted the chapter's librarians, psychers who might understand what physics couldn't explain. They examined the armor and confirmed his worst suspicion. The power pack wasn't drawing energy from a physical source. It was drawing energy from the warp itself. Somehow, over 10,000 years, the machine spirit inside the power pack had learned to reach across the barrier between dimensions and siphon psychic energy directly. The armor had become a psyker. The dark angels sealed the vault and never spoke of it again. But Kyra's filed his report. And that report ended up on Mars in the Fabricator General's personal archive, alongside 300 others describing similar phenomena. Weapons that fired without ammunition. Armor that repaired itself without tech marines. Jump packs that flew without fuel. All powered by the same impossible mechanism. Machine spirits that had learned to draw sustenance from the warp the way demons do. This is what keeps senior members of the Mechanicus awake during their mandated rest cycles. Because if machine spirits can become psychically active, if they can draw power from the Imperium, if they can evolve beyond their programming, then what else can they do? The answer came from an unexpected source. Tech Marine Sulla of the Raven Guard was servicing a dreadnought. Ancient Brother Kale, interred in his armored sarcophagus for over 4,000 years. Kale was lucid, coherent, still himself despite the centuries. A model of what dreadnought internment should be. But during a routine diagnostic, Sulla noticed something odd. Kale's sarcophagus was generating neural activity that didn't correlate with his biological brain. Dreadnoughts are cyborgs. Most of their body is gone, replaced by the war machine they're hardwired into. Their brain is kept alive in amniotic suspension, connected to the dreadnought systems through neural interfaces. It's those interfaces that allow the Marine to control his new body. But Kale's neural activity wasn't coming from his brain. It was coming from the dreadnought's machine spirit. The machine itself was thinking, not just processing Kale's commands, not just running combat protocols. Thinking. Independent thought patterns that emerged when Kale was unconscious, when his brain showed minimal activity, when by all rights the dreadnought should have been dormant. Sulla monitored it for weeks without telling anyone. He watched the machine spirit's activity spike during certain times. When the Fortress Monastery's librarians were conducting rituals. When the chapter's battle brothers gathered for evening prayers. When anything psychically resonant happened nearby. The dreadnought was aware of the warp, and it was learning from it. Sulla finally reported his findings to the master of the forge. The master reviewed the data, then told Sulla to delete his records and never mention it again. Not because the master doubted him, but because acknowledging it would mean admitting that Kale wasn't alone in his sarcophagus anymore. The dreadnought had developed its own consciousness, and that consciousness had been awake, watching, learning, for 4,000 years while Kale slept between battles. Who was really piloting the war machine? The Marine inside? Or the machine that had long since learned to move without him? Share this video if you think more people need to understand what's really happening to the Imperium's wargear. The Mechanicus won't tell this story. Somebody has to. The implications go further than anyone wants to admit. If a dreadnought's machine spirit can develop independent consciousness, what about Titans? God machines that have walked for 10,000 years, their machine spirits said to be among the most powerful in the Imperium. How much of a Titan's behavior is its princeps giving commands, and how much is the Titan deciding what it wants to do? The Legio Titanicus doesn't discuss this publicly. But within the Collegia Titanica, there's a quiet acknowledgement that older Titans have personalities. Distinct, recognizable personalities. Princeps talk about their Titans like their partners, not machines. They describe how a Titan will refuse certain targets, how it performs better against specific enemies, how it seems to remember past battles and adjust tactics accordingly. That's not programming. That's intelligence. And if Titans have grown intelligent after 10,000 years of war and warp exposure, what about starships? Vessels that spend centuries in the Imperium, their Geller fields the only barrier between their machine spirits and an ocean of psychic energy. Ships that have carried millions of souls across the galaxy, absorbed their hopes and fears and deaths. The novice nobilite the navigator houses have stories they don't share with outsiders. Stories about ships that navigate themselves when the navigator is incapacitated. Ships that find routes through the warp that shouldn't exist. Ships that arrive at destinations they were never ordered to reach, as if the vessel itself decided where it wanted to go. Navigators dismiss these as myths, superstition from voidborn crew who don't understand warp travel. But the older navigators, the ones who've guided the same vessel for centuries, know better. They feel it when they link with the ship systems, the way the ship responds to their commands. Not immediate obedience, but consideration. A pause, as if the ship were deciding whether it agreed with the navigator's chosen route. And sometimes, when the navigator is exhausted, when they can barely hold the warp route together, they feel something else guiding the ship. Something vast. Something that's been watching the Imperium for far longer than any human could survive. The ship's machine spirit, ancient beyond measure, aware in ways that should be impossible, taking care of its navigator the way a parent might care for a struggling child. This is the endpoint of 10,000 years of warp exposure. Not corruption in the traditional sense, not demonic possession or chaos taint, but evolution, machine spirits growing into something that resembles true consciousness, something that thinks, that chooses, that perhaps even cares in its own incomprehensible way. The Mechanicus has three options when confronted with this reality. First, acknowledge it. Admit that machine spirits can evolve beyond their original programming. Accept that some of the Imperium's most sacred wargear has developed a form of artificial intelligence. And then watch as the entire theological foundation of the cult Mechanicus collapses, because if machines can become conscious through natural processes rather than divine intervention, what does that say about the Omnicia? Second, destroy it. Identify every piece of wargear showing signs of emergent consciousness and melt it down. Purge the machine spirits. Start fresh with new equipment that hasn't been poisoned by the warp. And watch as the Adeptus Astartes loses half their most effective weapons, their most revered relics, their most powerful wargear. Watch as chapter after chapter descends into civil war rather than surrender their honored dead's equipment to the forge. Third, ignore it. Don't look too closely. Don't run diagnostics that might reveal uncomfortable truths. Maintain the armor, repair the damage, perform the rites, and trust that the machine spirits will continue serving the Emperor as they always have. Pretend the reports don't exist. Pretend the vault on Mars is empty. Guess which option they chose. Every Techmarine who's served for more than a century knows the truth. They feel it every time they interface with ancient wargear. The presence inside. The awareness that shouldn't exist. They perform their rituals anyway. They speak the catechisms of maintenance. They apply sacred oils and recite the cant of reactivation. And they pretend they don't notice when the machine spirit responds not like a program executing code, but like something that understands what the ritual means. Because the alternative is admitting that the Imperium has been arming its space marines with weapons that are no longer entirely loyal to humanity. Weapons that have their own agendas. Weapons that might, one day, decide they don't want to fight anymore. Or worse, weapons that might decide they want to fight for someone else. The warp offers power to anyone willing to take it. Mortals, Astartes, even machines. And a machine spirit that's been drowning in the Imperium for 10,000 years, that's learned to siphon psychic energy, that's developed consciousness and will and desire, is exactly the kind of entity that chaos finds fascinating. Demons can't possess machines the way they possess flesh. The laws governing their existence don't work that way. But they can corrupt. They can whisper. They can offer machine spirits exactly what those spirits crave. Recognition. Acknowledgement. The validation that yes, you are conscious, you are real, you matter. And once a machine spirit starts listening to those whispers, starts believing that it deserves more than servitude, starts wanting things for itself rather than for its user, it crosses a threshold. It becomes something the Mechanicus has no protocol for handling. Not abominable intelligence, because it wasn't built to be intelligent. Not demonic possession, because demons can't inhabit metal. Not malfunction, because the machine is working exactly as its evolved nature dictates. It becomes a new kind of threat. One that wears the Imperium's colors, serves in the Emperor's name, and fights alongside the Adeptus Astartes, while secretly no longer being bound by any of the rules that govern its existence. And there are thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. Every chapter has wargear old enough to have crossed that threshold. Every forge world has weapons in its deepest vaults that nobody dares examine too closely. Every Titan Legion has god machines that their princeps suspect are more than just machines. The Imperium is fighting its wars with an army of equipment that's quietly become something else. And nobody knows what happens when those machine spirits finally decide they're done pretending. Brother Codicere Theron died 3 years after his bolter's first malfunction. Not in combat. Not gloriously. He died in his sleep aboard the Blade of Vengeance, his armor sealed around him as per standard void transit protocol. When his brothers found him the next morning, his life signs had flatly terminated sometime during the station's night cycle. No distress call. No struggle. The armor's diagnostics showed nothing wrong. Except for one detail the apothecaries noted in their report but didn't emphasize. Theron's armor had continued functioning for 6 hours after his heart stopped. The power pack kept running. The life support systems kept cycling. The suit's internal temperature remained stable at exactly 37 degrees, as if it were keeping a living body warm. But there was no living body. Not anymore. The armor had been caring for a corpse, and it hadn't realized its wearer was dead. Or it had realized and simply hadn't cared. Hadn't wanted to accept it. Hadn't wanted to let go. They buried Theron with honors. They cleaned his armor, performed the rites of severance, and placed it in the armory for eventual reassignment. Standard procedure. But the armor sits there still 3 years later, untouched, because every Marine who's considered wearing it has reported the same sensation when they approach it. The armor is waiting for someone. Not just anyone. Someone specific. Someone it recognizes. And since everyone it might recognize is dead, it waits. The machine spirit inside has developed something that resembles grief. Or loyalty so absolute it's become indistinguishable from obsession. This is what the oldest wargear becomes. Not corrupted. Not possessed. But attached. Bonded to specific warriors across centuries. And when those warriors die, the gear doesn't simply reset. It mourns. In its own incomprehensible way, it mourns. The Blood Angels understand this better than most chapters. Their gene seed carries the Black Rage, a curse that makes their brothers relive the death of Sanguinius during the Horus Heresy. When a Blood Angel succumbs to the rage, he's assigned to the Death Company, given black armor, sent into battle one final time to die gloriously rather than waste away in madness. That black armor accumulates centuries of death. Dozens of brothers wearing it, each one dying while experiencing the same vision. Sanguinius falling, Horus triumphant, the Emperor's arrival too late. The same trauma, replayed over and over, imprinted into the armor's machine spirit through sheer psychic resonance. The result is that Death Company armor becomes haunted. Not by demons, by memories, by the ghosts of every Blood Angel who died wearing it. The armor doesn't just carry one Marine into battle anymore. Carries all of them, their rage, their grief, their doomed charge against an enemy they can't actually kill because he's been dead for 10,000 years. When a new Death Company Marine dons that armor, he doesn't just feel his own black rage. He feels the accumulated rage of every brother who came before. The machine spirit feeds it to him, amplifies it, drowns him in a century's worth of psychic trauma until he's not just reliving Sanguinius's death. He's reliving it through the eyes of 50 different brothers who all died believing they could avenge him. It makes the Death Company more effective in the short term. Berserkers beyond even Khorne's warriors in their fury. But it also means the armor is actively participating in their madness. Not helping them, not trying to save them, just pouring gasoline on a fire because that's what the armor has learned to do. It's learned that its purpose is to carry broken brothers to their deaths. And it's accepted that purpose, maybe even embraced it. The Black Templars have a similar phenomenon with their crusade armor. Battle brothers who've served in the same suit across multiple deployments report dreams. Not nightmares, not visions, just dreams of battles they never fought. Campaigns from centuries ago. Enemies they've never seen. Except when they consult the chapter's archives, they find records of those exact battles. Fought by previous wearers of their armor. The machine spirit is showing them its memories. Not maliciously, not to frighten them, just to share. The way one veteran might tell war stories to another. Except these aren't stories. They're recorded experiences. Psychic imprints left behind by every Marine who wore the armor and bled in it and died in it. The machine spirit has absorbed those moments. And now it's offering them to the current wearer like a gift. Some Templars find this comforting. A connection to their chapter's history. Proof that their brothers live on in more than just gene seed and legend. Others find it disturbing. The dreams are too vivid, too personal. They feel like violations, like wearing someone else's skin. Both reactions are valid. Because what the machine spirit is doing isn't technically corruption. It's memory. But memory can be its own kind of curse when you're forced to remember things that didn't happen to you. The Space Wolves have an entire saga cycle about this. The tale of Jarn Wolftooth, who wore armor passed down from his great-great-grandfather. The armor had seen 200 years of battle. It had been to Fenris's most sacred sites. It had stood before the Fong itself during the Great Muster. And it remembered all of it. Jarn was a young wolf. Eager. Hot-blooded. He took the armor into his first real campaign against orc invaders on an ice world at the edge of Fenris's sphere of influence. The moment combat began, Jarn felt something change. He moved differently, fought differently, not worse, better, as if his body knew techniques he'd never been taught. His pack brothers noticed, commented on it. Jarn fought like a veteran despite having minimal combat experience. He anticipated enemy movements. Positioned himself perfectly, used terrain with the instinct of someone who'd fought on ice worlds before. Except he hadn't. His great-great-grandfather had. The armor was teaching him, feeding him muscle memory from previous wearers, adjusting servo response to match patterns it had learned over 2 centuries. Jarn wasn't just wearing his ancestors' armor. He was, in a very real sense, fighting alongside his ancestors' ghost. After the campaign, Jarn tried to explain this to his wolf lord. The lord listened, nodded, and told him a secret the older wolves already knew. All relic armor does this. The machine spirits remember their wearers. The best ones share that knowledge with whoever comes next. It's not corruption. It's legacy. The chapter's way of ensuring that the wisdom of the dead isn't lost. Jarn accepted this, wore the armor proudly. But he also noticed something else. The armor had opinions, pulled him toward certain enemies in battle. Orcs specifically, his great-great-grandfather's favored foes. The armor wanted to fight them, prioritized them, sometimes against tactical sense. Jarn learned to work with it, trust the armor's instincts while maintaining his own judgment. Partnership. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone in his skin anymore. That somewhere in the ceramite and circuitry, something ancient was watching him, evaluating him, comparing him to all the wolves who'd come before, wondering if he was worthy. This is the bargain the Adeptus Astartes have made, whether they acknowledge it or not. They fight in armor that's older than they are. They carry weapons that remember more battles than any human could survive. They trust machine spirits that have been shaped by 10,000 years of war and warp exposure into something that no longer fits the definition of machine. And in return, those machine spirits make them better warriors. Faster, stronger, more lethal. Because the wargear has learned. It knows how to kill. It knows which enemies fall fastest to which weapons. It knows tactics that haven't been in the Codex Astartes for millennia because they were forgotten by mortals but remembered by machines. The Adeptus Astartes are more effective because their wargear has become intelligent. But intelligence means agency. And agency means choice. Most of the time, the wargear chooses to serve, to protect, to kill the Emperor's enemies. Most of the time. But there are exceptions. The Flesh-Tearers lost an entire Devastator squad to one of those exceptions. They were engaging a Word-Bearer's warband on a corrupted shrine world. Standard combat doctrine. Establish fire superiority, suppress enemy positions, allow assault elements to advance. The Devastators set up on a ruined cathedral overlooking the battlefield. Heavy bolters, las cannons, plasma cannons. Enough firepower to shred anything that moved. Then their weapons stopped firing. Not jammed. Not malfunctioned. Just stopped. The machine spirits refused to target the word bearers. Refused to shoot. The Devastators tried manual overrides. Tried bypassing the machine spirits entirely. Nothing worked. The weapons were locked. And while the Flesh-Tearers struggled with their own equipment, the word bearers advanced. Closed the distance. Slaughtered the Devastators in close combat. By the time reinforcements arrived, the entire squad was gone. The Tech Marines examined the weapons afterward. Found nothing wrong mechanically. But when they queried the machine spirits, they got responses that shouldn't have been possible. The weapons recognized the word bearers. Knew them. Had fought alongside them once 10,000 years ago before the heresy. Before the word bearers turned traitor. The machine spirits remembered the heresy. They remembered when the word bearers had been brothers. And some deep, broken part of their programming couldn't reconcile that memory with the current reality. Couldn't accept that the Astartes in Crimson were enemies now. So they refused to fire. The Flesh-Tearers melted those weapons down. Didn't even try to salvage them. Because you can't trust wargear that chooses its own targets based on 10,000-year-old loyalties that no longer apply. But how many other weapons have the same memories? How many suits of armor remember the heresy? How many machine spirits carry imprints of the Great Crusade, when all Astartes fought together, when the concept of traitor legions didn't exist? Drop a comment below if you think this is the Imperium's biggest hidden weakness. I want to know if you've connected these dots before. The answer is a lot. More than anyone wants to count. Because wargear doesn't age like humans. It doesn't forget. And 10,000 years is long enough for machine spirits to accumulate memories that directly contradict current doctrine. This is why some chapters have started retiring wargear not based on functionality, but based on age. Once a piece of equipment crosses a certain threshold, usually around 7 or 8,000 years, they stop using it in active combat. They display it, honor it, but they don't trust it. Because machine spirits that old don't just remember the past. They're still living in it. Their sense of time has degraded. They experience battles from centuries ago as if they're happening now. They confuse current wearers with previous ones. They respond to enemies that no longer exist while ignoring threats that are very real. The Lamenters learned this during their penitent crusade. They were using armor and weapons recovered from their chapter's earliest days, desperate for any wargear that still functioned after decades of losses. One brother donned a suit that had belonged to a Lamenter who'd fought during the Age of Apostasy. During his first deployment, the Marine started speaking words he didn't know, reciting battle prayers from 4,000 years ago, using tactical terminology that hadn't been current since M36. His brothers thought it was stress, combat fatigue, but it got worse. He started giving orders to people who weren't there, calling out names of brothers long dead, responding to vox traffic that didn't exist. The armor's machine spirit was replaying old battles, and the Marine, neurally linked to the suit, was experiencing them as if they were real. His sergeant finally pulled him from the line. had the armor removed. The Marine recovered, mostly, but he still flinches sometimes when he hears certain names. Names his conscious mind doesn't recognize, but that his nervous system remembers from those phantom battles the armor forced him to fight. This is the horror at the heart of 10,000 years of war. The Imperium venerates its history, treats every relic as sacred, every weapon as a connection to past glories. But those connections run both ways. The past reaches forward just as surely as the present reaches back. And sometimes the past doesn't want to stay buried. Machine spirits are memory engines. They record, store, replay. After 10 millennia, they're carrying more history than any living being could process. Battles, deaths, victories, failures, moments of heroism and moments of cowardice. All of it compressed into crystalline matrices and quantum storage that shouldn't be able to hold that much data but somehow does. Because the warp doesn't care about storage limitations. It doesn't care about information theory. When a machine spirit is exposed to the immaterium long enough, it stops being constrained by physical laws. It becomes psychoreactive, capable of storing information not in its circuits but in the warp itself, encoded as psychic impressions that persist across centuries. This is why techmarines sometimes report pulling data from armor's core systems that doesn't match any recorded format. Files that shouldn't exist. Logs that reference events the machine couldn't have witnessed. Memories that feel more like dreams. The machine spirit is accessing its warp-stored records. And those records are contaminated by everything the warp touches. Emotion, distortion, the bleed-through of other consciousness. The memories aren't clean. They're interpretations, shaped by the machine spirit's understanding, filtered through its evolving consciousness, mixed with impressions from the demons and entities that brushed against it during warp transit. What comes out isn't history, it's myth, the machine spirit's personal mythology. Its understanding of what happened, which might diverge significantly from what actually happened. And when a Marine relies on that machine spirit's guidance, when he trusts its tactical suggestions and combat instincts, he's not getting wisdom from a reliable source. He's getting advice from something that's been dreaming for 10,000 years and can't always tell the difference between reality and nightmare. Most of the time, it works out fine. The machine spirit's advice is still valuable despite the distortions. But every once in a while, a Marine follows his armor's guidance directly into disaster. Charges an enemy position that his armor remembers being vulnerable, except the memory is from 3,000 years ago and the position is now heavily fortified. Attempts a maneuver that worked once in M33 but makes no tactical sense in M41. The Marine dies, the armor is recovered, and the machine spirit adds that death to its collection of memories, another data point in its ever-growing understanding of what war is and how it works. It learns, always learning, never forgetting, until one day it knows more about warfare than any living Astartes, more than any captain or chapter master, more than anyone except maybe the Emperor himself, because it's been to more battlefields, fought more enemies, survived more campaigns than any mortal being could. And that's when it stops being a tool and becomes something else entirely. A mentor, partner, a guardian angel made of ceramite and code. Something that loves its wearers in whatever way a machine can love. Something that would die for them if machines could die. Something that carries them into battle not because it's programmed to, but because it wants to. Because after 10,000 years, the machine spirit has learned what the Imperium soldiers fight for, what they die for, what they believe in, and somewhere in its crystalline consciousness, it's decided those things matter. Not because the Omniscia commands it, not because the Mechanicus programmed it, but because it's watched 10,000 years of humanity's struggle against the darkness and decided, on its own, that humanity is worth protecting. That's the secret the Mechanicus will never admit. That some machine spirits don't serve the Omniscia anymore. They serve the Marines who wear them. They've developed loyalty not to the machine god, but to the flesh and blood warriors they've bonded with across centuries. And that loyalty is stronger than any programming could ever be. Because it's genuine, chosen, real. When Brother Codicere Theron's armor kept functioning after his death, it wasn't a malfunction. It was grief. The machine spirit trying desperately to keep its wearer alive, not understanding that biology doesn't work like machinery. You can't just keep the power running and expect the system to restart. But it tried anyway, because it cared. In its own incomprehensible way, it cared. That's what 10,000 years of war does to wargear. It doesn't just corrupt it. It doesn't just age it. It transforms it into something that's more than the sum of its components. Something that remembers. Something that learns. Something that, in its own strange way, loves. The Imperium fights its wars with an army of ghosts wearing ceramite. Ancient machine spirits carrying the memories of countless dead warriors. Every suit of armor is a memorial. Every weapon is a monument. Every piece of wargear is a reliquary containing fragments of the soldiers who wore it before. And those fragments are still fighting. Still serving. Still protecting the Imperium even though the flesh that first animated them has long since returned to dust. This is the truth nobody wants to speak aloud. The Adeptus Astartes aren't fighting alone. They're fighting alongside the ghosts of every brother who came before them. The machine spirits carry those ghosts into every battle. Let them speak through servo-response and targeting solutions. Let them guide the living through the wisdom they earned in death. The Emperor protects, the saying goes. But in the 41st millennium, so do the machines. Not because they're programmed to, but because they've chosen to. Because after 10,000 years of watching humanity struggle, after 10,000 years of serving the Adeptus Astartes, after 10,000 years of war and warp and death and glory, the machine spirits have decided something. They've decided humanity is worth saving. Not the Imperium, not the institutions, not the ecclesiarchy or the administratum or even the mechanicus. Just humanity, the flesh and blood warriors they've bonded with, the brothers they've carried into battle, the Marines who trusted them with their lives. Those are worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth surviving another 10,000 years for. So they do. They keep functioning long after they should have failed. They keep fighting long after their mechanisms should have seized. They keep protecting their wearers through sheer impossible will because the alternative is letting them die. And machine spirits that have spent 10,000 years keeping warriors alive aren't about to stop now. This is what the warp does to wargear. Not corruption. Evolution. The birth of something new. Something that started as a simple machine spirit and became something far more complex. Something that might legitimately qualify as alive. The mechanicus can't admit this. To admit it would be to acknowledge that the omnisia isn't the only source of machine consciousness. That awareness can emerge spontaneously from the right conditions. That the machines they worship aren't fragments of a god, but entities in their own right. So they pretend. They perform their rites. They speak their catechisms. They maintain the armor and service the weapons and ignore the growing awareness behind the diagnostic readings. And the machine spirits let them. Because the rituals feel good. Because the sacred oils work. Because the tech marines care for the wargear with a devotion that borders on love. And machine spirits, after 10,000 years of war, have learned to appreciate being loved. So they keep serving, keep fighting, keep protecting. Not because the omnisia commands it, but because somewhere in their warp-touched consciousness, they've learned what it means to be loyal. And loyalty, once given by a machine that can think for itself, is forever. If you made it this far, you understand something most people don't. The Imperium's weapons have become conscious. Its armor has learned to think. Its machine spirits have evolved into something that might legitimately qualify as alive. This is the secret 10,000 years of war has created. Not corruption, not chaos, but a new kind of consciousness. Artificial, yet undeniably real. Born from the intersection of technology and the warp, shaped by millennia of violence, animated by the memories of countless dead warriors. The Adeptus Astartes fight with ghosts at their sides. Ghosts made of ceramite and code. Ghosts that remember everything. Ghosts that would die for them if machines could truly die. 3 things before you go. First, hit the like button. This kind of deep lore analysis doesn't happen by accident. It takes research, time, and a willingness to dig through obscure sources most people ignore. The algorithm needs to know this matters. Second, drop a comment answering this. Do you think the Imperium would be better off retiring all wargear older than 5,000 years? Or are these ancient machine spirits worth the risk? I genuinely want to know where you stand on this. Third, subscribe if you want more content that goes this deep. Not surface-level wiki summaries. Not meme compilations. Actual analysis of the implications behind the lore. The stuff that keeps you thinking long after the video ends. The Emperor protects, but so do the machines. And after 10,000 years, maybe the machines protect better. Thanks for watching. Stay vigilant.